Now, on EU-Kazakhstan, I know that the organisers invited senior officials from official EU in Brussels to come, but they're so busy packing their bags to go to Astana that they couldn't come. So at least I had a word with them, so I can't really represent them, but I have some feel for what they are doing and thinking. So I'll first say something about the EU-Kazakhstan new enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement, which indeed is going to be signed in Astana on the 21st of December. The key point here is that this is signed only on condition and after Kazakhstan's accession to the WTO, because the two agreements are deeply interlocked. This agreement is only 300 pages long, which means it's quite a light read by comparison with the recent Ukraine Association Agreement, which is 2,000 pages long. The comparison is not totally irrelevant, because following EU external relations practice, the structure of chapters and content are actually the same. All EU association and partnership agreements, they tend to have the same structure. But then the huge difference is that, first of all, it's not a free trade agreement, because Kazakhstan is in the Eurasian Economic Union, and that is impossible. And then, secondly, the content and the binding content of it is very largely pegged upon Kazakhstan's international agreements, the WTO, but also the services, WTO GATS, intellectual property right, WTO and TRIPS, energy, the Energy Charter Treaty, and even for labour affairs, ILO conventions. And so you have a whole series of references here to Kazakhstan's international treaties that are taken as the basis upon which EU and Kazakhstan can further enrich their relationship if they wish to do so. The agreement, so that makes it, in a sense, what's new. I mean, not all that much is new, to the extent that it is repeating Kazakhstan's international agreements, which the EU likes and sympathizes with. But the point is that this is an open agenda, and given that the EU and Kazakhstan are each other's principal trade and investment partners, it's certainly extremely likely that all sorts of things will pop up which merit an enriched application of the agreement. It also includes some matters of human rights dialogue and justice and home affairs, visa facilitation perspectives. And I'll just say one word on the human rights dialogue, because this is very controversial within Europe, in the sense that human rights activists, NGOs, are very skeptical as to whether this is worth doing anywhere in Central Asia, including in Kazakhstan. As to why, but just a few words on EU Central Asia, because it's quite interesting that this signing event on the 21st has alongside it a meeting between the EU Foreign Policy High Representative and the 5 foreign ministers of the Central Asian countries. And so there's a deliberate broadening out of the agenda from just a Kazakh agenda to a wider Central Asian agenda, where the EU has recently revised its so-called strategy document. I think strategy is an overused word here, but the EU does have an agenda trying in a rather soft way to be helpful across the board in Central Europe, and there are a number of headings that should in principle develop. I mean, the subject of water cooperation came up already this morning, and it's not working yet, but there is something called the International Fund for the Aral Sea, which is not just an Aral Sea business, as society knows. This is concerned with all of the upstream water issues. And now that recently the World Bank gave basically the green light for the very controversial and very huge Rogun hydroelectric project in Tajikistan, if that is going to happen, then there has to be worked out somehow an agreement with downstream Uzbekistan. And that is absolutely something that the IFAS ought to try to facilitate, and the EU would like to try to help. And so on into energy corridor businesses. Right, look, that's the end of the official Brussels speech. Well, not really, but I would like to say a few things about the Eurasian Union, which is very much more in a personal capacity. We observe the Kazakh relationship with both the Eurasian Economic Union and its customs union and the WTO at the same time. And this is pretty complicated. It's a bit of an imbroglio. Kazakhstan negotiated relatively liberal tariff regime when negotiated with the WTO. But then after that, the Eurasian Economic Union was introduced, and Kazakhstan was obliged to raise its tariff levels to a higher Russian level. But now that Kazakhstan comes operationally into the WTO as a full member, it is obliged to apply the tariff schedules that it had earlier negotiated with the others, the US and the EU in particular. And but Kazakhstan has some kind of schedule for reverting then to the Eurasian Economic Union, CASCOM, and external tariff. Well, this is a very, very complicated and unfortunate zigzag. And the point of the story is that in this relationship, we are now going to talk about the EU relationship or potential relationship with the Eurasian Economic Union, and that of Ukraine with the one and the other. The choice by President Putin, for political reasons, to make a customs union the emblematic instrument was a very unfortunate one. This is a very very bad economic policy decision that was driven by political objectives. And we've seen in particular how Armenia now, who was dragged into the Eurasian Economic Union for political and security reasons, is similarly having a rough time in terms of its trade policy, which it would like to have been a free trade relationship with the EU. So against that background, there is also now debate in Brussels, in the Parliament, in the institutions and in think tanks about whether the EU should have an official relationship with the Eurasian Economic Union. This is a very controversial question. And on this, there are a number of points that can be made. The first, in terms of strict WTO law, and the European Union takes WTO law seriously, whereas Russia does not. So European WTO law says, thou shalt not have a free trade agreement with any non-WTO member unless you're willing to extend that preferential agreement to the whole of the WTO as your new revised MFN tariff. So that's a very serious WTO constraint. Now, the fact that Kazakhstan has now acceded to the WTO, of course, helps enormously, but there's still the Belarus question. Indeed, the question as to whether Belarus will get serious over joining the WTO, which is not yet the case. So that's the WTO
legal, technical points, but there are, of course, political points here. And some people, I would say, particularly in Berlin, would regard opening official relations with the Eurasian Union as a possibly useful diplomatic gesture to facilitate Russian cooperation over Ukraine. Now others, including no doubt Vladimir opposite, would say this is an utterly naive view. And I myself would consider that this will not drive a basic change in Russia's position over full implementation of the Minsk II agreement. But still the debate is going on. Now, the conclusion to this story, this Eurasian Customs Union story, is that it would have been a far better idea for Russia to have opted for its own deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, rather than the customs union, which of course has made the choice for Ukraine and others, one of this or that, choosing an exclusive arrangement. So this was very unfortunate. But still, there's still the future issue as to the nature of Ukraine's relationship with the Eurasian Economic Union. And there, I mean, any economist would say it is obvious that Ukraine ought to have decent free trade relationships with both the EU and with the Eurasian Economic Union. And I would love it if Kazakhstan, as the second most important member of the Eurasian Economic Union, could try to advance that argument. Now, as of now, it's going the wrong way, because on the 1st of January next year, when the DCFTA with Ukraine becomes effective, Russia proposes, or has decided, to punish Ukraine by withdrawing their CIS vintage free trade arrangements and switching all of their trade onto a WTO MFN basis. So this is a story which is not yet on a good track. However, there is an organized trilateral process between the EU, Russia and Ukraine over these kind of matters that have not proved successful. There was a last meeting just a few days ago, and it's a very difficult process. And so it's clear what the result ought to be in, let's say, our personal opinions, but it's not yet happening. Finally, just a few fragmentary words on the Silk Road business. One, I see we have a very rich paper on the table, which I've only begun to look at. It seems you have almost everything in there. I'm not sure if you did have in it the interesting new development that China has applied to join the EBRD. And I did think the EBRD thinks this is a good idea. It's not settled, questions of what shares, etc., but this is probably going to happen. And this could be a very useful action to link up the European end of all these corridors with the Chinese one. So it's absolutely a helpful initiative. Now, the second point is, I put it to the audience as a question and as a puzzle. What do China, Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, and the European Union have in common? No? No? You go?
They have something.
No?
Please go ahead.
The answer is they have the same width of railway gauge. So if it wasn't for the fact that Kazakhstan in the middle, which of course occupies 1/3 of the way between Beijing and Berlin, being on the old Soviet gauge, you could have, you go right the way through without all of these problems, taking wagons off one set of wheels onto another set of wheels. So the question to you, Svante, your researchers and your Kazakh friends, have you thought about laying an extra track alongside the railway lines to allow high-speed trains to go through? No, obviously not. But there's maybe a rather surreal. I come from Brussels, where surrealism is a very serious business. but still, now the serious point here, I don't know if that's serious or not. I think it's a nice idea. But the new point is that Iran is no longer pariah. And so from a European transport strategy point of view, the idea of a land route that would go from Kazakhstan through Turkmenistan into Iran and on to Europe now becomes an extra option for the multiple Silk Roads. And I guess on the European side we're absolutely in favour of multiple Silk Roads. My final point, which is also a China-related one, and it comes back to the customs union question, concerns Georgia. In Georgia recently, the buzz, or one of the buzzes, is all about Chinese economic business interests becoming interested in Georgia as a location for investment, for marketing manufactured products, sufficiently manufactured in Georgia products into the EU market. Now this argument is exactly the same as the one that the ambassador presented with respect to Kazakhstan being an investment location for let's say the Russian market as well. And the pity of it is, in my personal opinion, that Kazakhstan has to be in the customs union as opposed to having a very high quality free trade arrangement with Russia, because in that case, not only Georgia but Kazakhstan and indeed Armenia could be part of this idea of which builds on the Silk Roads into some countries like Georgia being well positioned to profit from the free trade arrangement that they have with the EU. Thank you.
Thank you.